Happy Monday and welcome back to the IDP Heat Seekers. Tonight, we got a doozy. We got team defenses on the docket. We are going to help you in the midst of all the wonderful training camp goodness that is beginning to get underway. Think about, talk about, and bring up our top team defenses for the upcoming fantasy football season. So hopefully you're buckled up and you're ready for a wild ride through the world of team defenses. And I know that redraft, those are still pretty regular occurrence. So if you can get anything of this in Dynasty and this does you any good, great. I don't see team defenses in any of my Dynasty leagues probably in the last 7-8 years. So this is more redraft focused. And there we go. With that being said, I am joined by the man, the myth, the wreath. How are you, my friend? How is the world treating you on a Monday?
Doing all right. It's Monday. It's the end of Monday, which is great. And tonight's the night we take IP out of IDP.
And hopefully, Austin, you have peed so that you don't have to IP during the show. How are you, sir?
I'm all out of it. But yeah, I'm good on a Monday. Glad to be here with you guys tonight, enjoying another show. Looking forward to this one. This one's going to be a fun one. Don't have to talk as much about these specific players. We can look at this holistically and give them the goods on redraft team defenses. It's always fun.
And I will say, for any of you that are do any kind of evaluating and looking into team defenses prior to your redraft, Fantasy Pros does a good job of keeping historical data on team defenses. As I was preparing for the show, this is one of the sites that I referenced because they have the last 10 years worth of kind of scoring and data for team defenses. Now, obviously, this is based off of their specific fantasy football scoring for team defenses, so it may not necessarily match up. So make sure, like we always say, verify what your scoring looks like. But they keep track of that stuff historically, and that it's super easy to navigate and get through. So huge shout out to Fantasy Pros. With that being said, we did our own top 10, and then I took the average of those. So the top 10 that we will talk about, and actually be a little more than 10, those will be the combination of the three of our minds mashed together. So number one, almost a consensus number one, the Los Angeles Rams. Oh, I also forgot we got notes to get to. So hold on the Rams. We got notes. Training camp's here. Duh. My brain is not there. But training camp is here, and we got 4 pieces of news that we do need to talk about because we need people to understand what to make of it. So 2 people are holding out. 2 big-name fantasy football players are holding out because of contract issues. Jesse Bates from Cincinnati and Roquan Smith from the Bears. Roquan Smith's is more of a contract dispute, and he's holding out for that. Jesse Bates is, I believe he's a franchise tag issue, and he doesn't want to play on that. He wants a long-term deal. So with both of these guys, I'll start with you, Craig. Does this worry you? Because it's early in camp, does it not matter? Where's your head at when you hear things like this, especially on the defensive side with big names like this?
with the rules that they've gone to in regards to, especially with the franchise tag, because there's specific rules in regards to how that gets used and what you can and can't do with that. That one doesn't worry me. I mean, the amount of fines and just penalties, like for even future free agency for someone like Bates, he's not going to want to do that. And I understand the wanting to hold out, want to get paid more. They sort of kind of maybe got his replacement in the draft this year. He's going to end up playing. How much he plays, we'll see how much his pocketbook is fine taking it. But it doesn't sound like they're going to re-sign him, but I think he's going to end up playing this year. Roquan, a young defense that's going to need someone like him to anchor it because they're probably going to be on the field a lot. I expect him to get his contract or, a couple of years added on or something to be there. So neither one are really that big of a deal anymore, just the way with the NFL has changed this sort of stuff in my mind.
What about you, Austin? Is this concern at all?
No, I mean, I'm pretty much right there with Craig. I mean, I think both guys are going to find their way to the field. This is just posturing a little bit. Something we see every offseason. We see it more so on the offensive side, and now we're kind of starting to see it happen with the defensive side, especially some of these bigger names. But at the end of the day, these guys, they're going to lose money the longer they hold out. These guys are going to find a way back to the field, whether they're with the team next year or not. That's obviously to be seen, and a lot of that will be determined with how things play out from here. But it's mostly, in my opinion, it's just posturing, and the team's going to do the same thing. It's gonna look ugly at times potentially, but at the end of the day, they'll either find a resolution or they won't. And I think that this year I'm not concerned with these guys missing time. I think they'll be on the field.
Okay, so next up on the news and notes, This one's a little bit more near and dear to Craig's heart. So his Dallas Cowboys are potentially looking to sign Anthony Barr. Does that move the needle at all? And I'll go counterclockwise. We'll go back to Austin on this one to start. Does this give you anything? Does this make you think of anything? I know their depth we've talked about in the past here on this show, that depth is an issue, but Anthony Barr's got a lot of starting experience. What does that do to you when you hear they potentially are looking to sign him? They brought him in. Obviously nothing's imminent, but they've at least brought him in, and it looks like they're probably the most interested party so far.
Yeah, and this was which team?
Cowboys.
Yeah, Cowboys. Yeah, they needed help the offseason, and I was surprised that they didn't sign who's the guy from the Seahawks?
Almost anybody.
Wagner?
Yeah, anybody. Yeah, Wagner. I mean, I thought like it would just made so much sense, and I thought, man, they're gonna actually get this done. I feel like they're going to. It made too much sense, and then they watched him go to the Rams, and of course they did damage control after that publicly, which is always really funny. But yeah, it's a joke. I don't know. I don't know. I think he could help them this season. But I still think that the Cowboys have some pretty good players that haven't seen the field yet and that are kind of undiscovered. Jabril Cox is one of those guys who I am curious what he's going to do this year. I think Vander Esch is probably going to be did he re-sign for 1 or 2 years?
Yep, 1 year.
1 year, yeah. So I think after this year, he'll probably be gone. I was surprised they brought him back. I think they probably just did that out of necessity more than anything. They sat on their hands too long, and then were just kind of forced to bring Van Der Esch back in. But I think, he could definitely help. He does have a lot of experience. He is a veteran. I'm not really sure what exactly was going on with him, why he didn't see the field with the Vikings last year as much, if he was just banged up or what. But I know Nick Vigil saw a lot of playing time, and Barr just never really worked out. I had actually tried to roster Barr on a lot of teams, hoping that he would pay off, and he just kind of never did. So if he comes into the Cowboys, I mean, he should have a shot. But do I think that he's going to make a huge impact? I'm not really so sure.
All right, Craig, this is your team. This is America's team. What do you make of this?
Before we get to that, you dropped the ball on the big news that they're discontinuing the Choco Taco for some reason. So I haven't had one of those in years, but seeing that,
I'm
my heart
not
got sad.
believing it. I don't believe it, so I'm not receiving it. So I'm believing that the Choco Taco will return gloriously.
Klondike, the company, saying they're discontinuing it. So R.I.P. Choco Taco. As far as Anthony Barr, man, I don't really. He doesn't move the needle for me. He's a fine piece and a nice real life player, probably more so than IDP, which is sort of what we tend to focus on here. Same thing with when he was in Minnesota. I think he was sort of miscast and he was never properly used. Really, he was used, on one of those outside backers that he didn't really get to the passer a whole lot. He didn't get you a whole lot of tackles. He did a little bit of everything, but he was just never used as sort of that main guy. And I don't think he would be in Dallas either. They probably do need to sign some sort of veteran depth, at least. I, as a Cowboys fan, would feel more comfortable if they did, given that they have, as we mentioned, Parsons and Van Der Esch that played really anything in regards to snaps last year for him.
Mm-hmm.
I have a hard time with the team with the aspirations that they have, thinking they're just going to go in with those two and a bunch of unproven players. Van Der Esch, to Austin's point, was sort of a necessity. They needed someone, I think, a veteran that sort of knew the system that was going to be able to be on the field for him if he had to be. So this doesn't move the needle for me a whole lot. He played, it was 11 games. He was hurt last year, and they're doing that whole dance of, we're looking at signing him. No, we're not. And it's just, who knows? If he gets signed, great. It's someone to monitor, but unless you're in super deep leagues, I don't see how it moves the needle.
I don't know that there's a free agent that Dallas could sign that really would, quite honestly. I mean, yeah. I know, I brought it up, and Barr at times was a bit of a tackle hog for fantasy earlier on. But, when you look at guys that are out there, I mean, Barr's probably the biggest name. They've got some older guys, the Jamie Collins and Deontay Hightowers of the world. And I think Joe Scobert may even be a free agent still from Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Then you're getting guys that were Alec Ogletrees of the world and the Tahir Whiteheads, the guys that kind of popped a little bit for a little while, but it didn't last long, or they just were kind of one-dimensional. So I don't know that Dallas could sign somebody where I'm like, okay, this really changes things. I really think if they're smart, they just run with some of these young guys and kind of throw them in the fire. I mean, this team is strong enough that it should be able to withstand growing pains for young linebackers. Hopefully. Okay, so last piece of news and notes. Patriots are activating Raekwon McMillan. He's kind of the strong side linebacker who was a thing for a bit, but he's bounced around. He started with Miami, moved on to the Raiders, and now is with the Patriots. And I think he's projected to start alongside, Bentley, and I can't think of anyone else.
They got Mac Wilson and Judon. Judon kind of plays more up on the line.
Judon's going to be an edge, so yeah, I mean, it's going to be Bentley at the first couple downs, and then your linebacker du jour.
So, Austin, is this something that you are thinking about, looking at if you need some linebacker help? This guy's never really had a huge productive season, but definitely was a higher draft pick, was a guy that people kept, this is one of those you were hoping would eventually pop because the teams kind of took him early enough. I think he was a second or third round pick, and
second rounder,
never really produced. What are you doing with news like that? Anything?
Yeah, no, not really. For me, unless it was a really, really super, super deep league, most of my leagues, he's not going to find his way onto the roster personally. I think that New England does have some nice pieces on their defense. I don't know that an outside linebacker is one of them. When I look at linebacker, I typically try to go more for the guy in the middle, not really the edge rushers. And so, him playing off the ball, outside linebacker, I would more go for a guy like a Dre Greenlaw or somebody like that. I could see somebody like that making the roster. Raekwon McMillan, he's pretty far down for me, where I don't think having him being an outside linebacker on my roster makes a whole lot of sense unless I'm in an extremely deep league.
What about you, Mr. Reith?
He had one good year, his rookie year, I believe it was, and he graded out really well for run defense and absolutely nothing else. He had a really nice athletic profile, and he had quality stats, but he didn't do much else. And then he was hurt, I think, all of last year. He's coming back from some sort of injury. I don't remember exactly what it was. And it's just such a mess. We've talked about it before, but the way the Patriots use their, sort of on-ball linebackers, not talking about more of an edge guy like Judon, they just rotate them. It's like whatever you do well, they're going to get you out there to do that, and then they're going to bring someone else in, and you can find a little bit of sort of backup IDP value. But as far as people worth going out and planting your flag on and grabbing, there's none of these guys that overly excite me. So it's more of a pass. I hope he does well. I hope he gets fully recovered and proves us wrong. But to date, we just haven't seen anything to make him sort of worthwhile as far as adding.
Funny thing is, I'm more interested in all of their backups. Josh Uche and Mac Wilson and Cameron McGrone. Like, I'm intrigued more by some of these younger guys that they've gotten behind the scenes than I do the starters. I mean, Judon should be really solid, come off the edge again, and have some value. But other than that, I was never a big Bentley fan. I know that he, will give you some weeks where it's solid production, but he's a depth guy at best in fantasy. And I'm with you guys. McMillan, I mean, has the tools, never really seemed to come to fruition. So, I'm just moving on. But thought that was interesting news because he is projected to be a starter in that defense. And you never know. He could be a thing, but definitely not something I'm considering at this point. All right, so back to the redraft team defense ranking. Sorry about that, folks. I jumped the ball and got a little excited. But number one we have is the LA Rams. They have been strong over the last few years. We'll start with you, Kraig. What makes you think that this will be kind of one of the top, one or two defenses in fantasy this year?
Well, it starts up front when you have one of the top two best defensive players in the NFL right up front in the middle of your defense and the defensive line. That's a great place to start. And he's going to get pressure even if he isn't getting you the sacks, and he just makes everyone around him better. That sort of pass rush is what's going to make your secondary better as far as getting to the quarterback quicker, making them uncomfortable, get those big plays. What big plays we're talking about. It's going to depend on your scoring. We say that with IDP, it matters for team defense too, but generally speaking, you're not going to count on teams shutting other teams out and just keeping them to, Chicago Bears and those Baltimore Ravens. I don't know. I have the years memorized off the top of my head, but those historical defenses that just weren't allowing teams to score points, those are so few and far between. You want to look for where you can get those big plays, and Aaron Donald helps that up front. I had him at 2 here, so I had him, right up there with you guys. My big question was, is that sort of pass rush outside of Donald still going to be there? They had Leonard Floyd, who sort of found himself once he went to the Rams after that year in Chicago where he started to break out. But who's going to be across from him that you're going to be trusting to get to the quarterback as far as another edge pass rusher? Because it's Donald, Floyd, not a whole lot else. And we've yet to see if Floyd's really going to do it on his own without anyone across from him. But the secondary still, the big name there is Jalen Ramsey. They have a couple of safeties that are decent. They still, they still have Peters. He was in Baltimore, isn't he?
Yeah, he's in Baltimore.
Yeah.
I can't even think of who's across from him. I know Darius Williams is there, but it's just they got a couple big names and guys that are going to be productive, but it worries me that there's not as many ancillary pieces that I'd have interest in terms of believing they're going to get those big plays.
Well, yeah, right now they're projected starters in the secondary. David Long is across from Ramsey, then Nick Scott, Jordan Fuller are the safeties, and obviously Taylor Rapp is there, and Terrell Burgess. I mean, Troy Hill is their projected nickelback, but they drafted, three of their draft picks this year were cornerbacks, so obviously they know that that's going to be a need for them. So there's a lot there. I mean, there's a lot of young guys that they've grabbed either later in the draft or college free agents on the defense this year specifically. I mean, they've got a lot of young pieces back there. So Austin
Williams isn't even there anymore. He left, so I was wrong about that.
Yeah, Williams is gone. Darian Kendrick is right behind Jalen Ramsey, and then they got Kobe Durant and Robert Rochelle are their backup corners. So they're young at cornerback behind their veteran. One veteran really. I mean, David Long's only been in year 3. So, Austin, what's your take of this defense, and what gives you the warm fuzzies that they're the best?
I'll keep it short. I would say Leonard Floyd is one of the more underrated players on this defense. The addition of Bobby Wagner, obviously, is a really great addition. He's going to complement Ernest Jones well, who I thought was a really promising rookie guy that I'm targeting in a lot of leagues as often as I can. I think he's going to really do great this year. Justin Hollins, who came from Denver last year, plays a little different style than those other two guys. He's more of the guy who can, run around, move around the field, make plays. He's not really great in coverage, but he's quick enough. You could put him in position to be able to make plays. And then, of course, Aaron Donald, who, in my opinion, is not just one of the top 2 defensive linemen. He's probably a top 2 player on the field at any time, any game. So he's incredible. And then, you still got Greg Gaines on the defensive line, Ashawn Robinson, who's really good. Terrell Lewis, who was a guy we talked about earlier, he's an outside linebacker. He's a guy who could see the field some this year as well that we were interested in. So they've got, pretty good depth behind their guys. The secondary isn't as strong as it was last year, I don't think, but they've still got the right pieces in the right places. And I think, just overall their defense is going to be one that's going to be hard to beat this year.
Well, and if you look at how they graded out, obviously we talk about that on the regular basis. Best team by far defensively in 2021. If you look at PFF, the tackling is the part that they really ranked lowest at, and that was at 10th. Other than that, they were great at pass rush, great at coverage, great against the run. I mean, this is one of those defenses that, yes, things may have changed, but I think this defense has still got a lot to be excited about. I mean, they replaced a veteran with a better veteran. Von Miller's good. I like Bobby Wagner better, at where they're at in their careers right now. So I'm with you guys. This is probably by far going to be the highest scoring fantasy defense. Most likely, I would guess it's probably double digits higher than anybody behind them, just because of how productive they can be and how they can cause turnovers and do some of those special things. So number 2, we got the Buffalo Bills. This is a team that, another one of those strong defenses. They actually graded out as the 9th best team last year. When you look at PFF, not great against the run, not strong against tackling, but everything else is good. Pass rush, coverage, things like that. So we'll start with you on this one, Austin. What do you like about the Bills? I know you had them you had them at 2. Craig had them at 1, and I had them at 4 in our rankings. So what do you like so much about them?
Well, I love how young the defense is, and they have a good balance of veteran presence and also young guys. Gregory Rousseau, who came in and played, I thought, pretty well last year. I thought he was one of the better defensive ends in the class coming out of Miami. And being a Miami fan, I thought, well, maybe I'm a little biased there, but no, I watched him play, and he was fantastic. And he came into the league, he did exactly what you expected from him. Ed Oliver started to kind of come into his own on the defensive line as well, which is great. They added Von Miller, obviously, off the edge. And then Tremaine Edmonds, he's just a solid middle linebacker. I thought they did well in the draft this year by adding Kyer Elam, who's projected to be a starter on that defense. We'll see if that happens, but it looks like he has a pretty clear path. When you look at some of the depth that they have there. Micah Hyde at free safety and Jordan Poyer, who are, just outstanding safeties, and then Tre'Davious White and Teron Johnson, who, Teron Johnson's a guy that, we were talking about in our rankings last week at cornerback. So, they have some guys on the defense just up and down at secondary, defensive line, linebacker. They've got it in all the right places. And so they're just another one of those defenses when you look at it, in its completeness, it's outstanding, and every reason in the world for them to be a top finisher. And I'm going to go ahead and just say, based on the pieces that they have, that I feel pretty comfortable putting them at 2.
Craig, what are your thoughts? They were your favorite defense this year.
They're on similar to the Rams, but a high-powered offensive team where teams are going to have to be, trying to make big plays and moving the ball quickly against them. When you're looking at over the course of the season, which is going to give that team more opportunities to get those big plays, the sacks and the interceptions, pass deflections, whatever you count. They have a team full of playmakers, and I think that their defense from top to bottom and even the depth that they have better depth and overall talent than I think the Rams do. I think the Rams, with that salary cap situation that they're in, they've had to, try to go find some piecemeal things on the cheap or guys that have been underrated for whatever reason, hope to plug them in and play them and get results, where that Bills defense is just loaded in terms of playmakers and talent. And I'm not going to reiterate all the names because Austin went through it, but the secondary is stacked in terms of talented guys that make plays. Same thing with that defensive line. You're looking at what matters for fantasy football. I'm not paying a whole lot of attention in terms of like PFF grades for overall stuff, because what we're looking for is points. And this is a team that's going to end up getting you points and making you those big plays. So that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Yep. Buffalo's a strong defense. They got a lot of good pieces. They got good depth. I could see them get an injury in almost any position and have solid depth to be able to step up and take that place, which that shows me how good of a defense they are, because they've built strong starters. They've got a very strong depth on this team, and these are all guys that can produce. And a lot of them have been under the radar players in the first place. I mean, we've talked about in the past Hyde and Poyer being guys that are just always woefully underrated. So I'm excited about this defense. And at 4, I'm probably a little lower on them than I should be, but I like some of the other defenses just as much. And building out these team defensive rankings for the show was difficult, because there's a lot to like about, kind of the top 5 or 6 defenses easily to like about them. So if you have them in any order, I wouldn't blame you. Next up on this list is actually the defense that I have as my favorite this year, the Indianapolis Colts. I ranked them at 1. Craig has them at 5. Austin at 4. They return a lot of good starters. They return a strong group of players, as well as coaching is good. They got a great defensive coach, and though their former defense coordinator moved on to Chicago, their new one looks and sounds to be just as good. I'll start with you, Craig, on this. What do you like about the Colts? What do you think about their chances being a top 5 fantasy defense this year?
I really like their defensive line in terms of a unit that's going to be able to get sacks. They have DeForest Buckner, who's one of the best interior linemen in the NFL. They got a couple of the young guys there, and Hay and Odengbo, who they got last year. They added Ngakoue, who that's just what he does, is he gets to the quarterback. He doesn't going to get a whole lot else, but team defenses usually isn't counting tackles. So for our purposes tonight, that's fine. The only concern that I have is that secondary. There's a lot of unproven guys there. They have 2 names, if you want to call it, at the top, with Kenny Moore, who we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, and then Gilmore signed there. He was a big name for a long time, but he's getting a little bit older. Both their safeties are just sort of meh for, big playmaking purposes. They got Blackman, who's a nice young promising guy that showed well last year, but we haven't seen him in a full-time role all year. Rodney McLeod's more of a, veteran backup type who, probably isn't going to get caught a place and screw up a whole lot, but he's not going to do a whole lot of great for you either. And then it's a whole bunch of young guys at that third cornerback, which we know is so important in today's NFL. So out of the ones we've talked about, I just have more concerns about that secondary holding up and being able to make those plays.
Yeah, I mean, they did not put nearly as much draft capital into that. I mean, Nick Cross in the third round and a 7th round corner. I mean, so other than that, they're hoping, and obviously Kari Willis, the surprise retirement just before training camp, just a few weeks back, probably was not expected. So that'll be interesting to see how that, because he was involved pretty heavily in that defense for a little bit here. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes. Austin, what's your take on the Colts?
So the Colts last year finished, I think, tied for third in interceptions in team defense, which I thought was interesting. And what they didn't do so well was sacks. I think, they finished in sacks around 25th, it looks like, tied for 25th. So I would like to see those numbers go up for sure. Do they have the playmakers up front? Yes, they do. Where do I think a lot of their production comes from is having a guy like Darius Leonard and having a guy on the defensive line like DeForest Buckner, who just generates so many stats that convert into fantasy points. But you're going to have some of these other young guys on the defensive line step up. Kwity Paye is going to have a better year. He's going to have to be more present this year. Obviously, he's going to have to be on the field to be able to do that. So you'd like to see him stay healthy and just see him develop. Does he have the potential? Yeah, I like him as a player. I like a lot of these guys on this defense as a player. On the back end, I think the loss of Kari Willis, who just retired this offseason, I think is a big blow to them. Do I think he's irreplaceable? No, not necessarily, but I think he was a really good player, and I thought that he played well in that secondary, and then with Kenny Moore, and now you've added Stephon Gilmore. We'll see. I mean, the defensive backs they're talented. I mean, we'll see if they can hold up, kind of like to Craig's point. But last year they were productive. They were able to generate big plays, which is always converts well to fantasy points. And just like we talked about any defense before, even the Bills, you've got to see that production too. Outside of the tackles, you've got to see the big play production, because that's really where you're going to get a lot of your points from.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, Joss. That is a true statement. I don't the Napoleon Kaufman. I cannot confirm that, but I do know at least the first part is correct. Okay, so we move on from the Colts to our number 4 team on team defense of 2022 ranks, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is a team that really didn't have a lot of turnover. I mean, obviously we know Gronk retired. Ndamukong Suh is not re-signed. It looks like he may be a Raider. He'll be a training camp signee somewhere, and maybe it's back at Tampa. I mean, anything's possible right now. Akeem Hicks, who was a strong vet from Chicago, is there that will probably fill that role. They got William Golston, and then Vita Vea is still holding down the middle of that defensive line. And then the rest of the defense is basically plug and play from what they've had over the previous few years. So what do we make of this defense, and why do we think they're going to be anywhere near a top 10 fantasy defense this year? And I'll start with you, Kraig.
Well, again, really good offense on the other side of the ball that is going to be scoring points and putting pressure on the other team to keep up with them. The only reason I have them a little bit lower here is they've had more turnover sort of on the defensive side of the ball with bigger names not coming back. I do like some of the additions that they've had, but really that outside pass rusher opposite of Shaq Barrett, they're going with their first round pick last year, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, as opposed to, it seems like, re-signing JPP. We'll see if he's ready. He showed nice last year in spurts, but having 3 sort of those outside pass rushers you can kind of count on is nice to have. And I just sort of want to see it that, hey, it's coming together. It's going to work. These guys are going to be able to do it before I put them up, at that top 3 or whatever. But clearly it's a talented group. Again, a really nice secondary. They had some nice pieces in Logan Ryan and Keanu Neal, who are veterans that can play all over the place, however they need to be. They're going to be able to make plays. So still like them. Still think they're going to do well.
Austin, what about you?
Yeah, I would agree with that overall. They do have some pretty nice pieces in the secondary. I see where somebody was saying that DBs are kind of average in Tampa Bay, but I think that Carlton Davis is one who's really kind of underrated. Mike Edwards isn't terrible. Winfield, I really like Winfield, and they've got Logan Ryan behind him, and then even at strong safety, they're too deep. They've got ex Cowboys Hall of Famer Keanu Neal. They've got some guys on the defense. I love
That just
Shaq
happened.
Barrett. Yeah, it did happen. You're welcome, Cowboys fans in the stream, and Craig. I do like Shaq Barrett a lot. Shaq Barrett's one of the most underrated players in the NFL, underrated linebackers. He really makes a difference. Levante David as well, just a veteran presence. Devin White, good young guy. William Golson, Viave. I mean, they got guys up and down this defense. And to be honest, you look at their statistics and how they finished in last year, and not just how they graded out, but the fumble recoveries, the sacks, the interceptions, all those big plays we were just talking about with the last group. These guys are ranked inside the top 10 in every single category. The tackles are there, the numbers are there. So, these guys have been making plays. Tampa Bay is a tough defense, and I expect them to be the same. So, I see no reason to drop them too far out. They did lose some key big name pieces, but I kind of like the stuff that they brought in behind them. I think that they did pretty good this offseason.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. I think when you look at this team, because of what they have on the offense still, I think you have to assume that they're still going to be strong across the board. They should be able to keep teams honest and really be able to force some turnovers, and be able to cause teams to have to try to keep up with the offense, because Tampa Bay is going to put up a solid amount of points. We're hearing Chris Godwin potentially could be back for week 1. This team should be able to be firing on all cylinders pretty quick, and teams are going to have to keep up with them, and that gives the opportunity for producing some turnovers. So I'm definitely with you. I think there's some intriguing upside with Tampa Bay that people may not be thinking about, just because they retiring and things like that is overshadowing the value there. Number 5, we're looking at the LA Chargers. So the Charger team that, obviously big news over the offseason is trading for Khalil Mack. And then, they brought over Sebastian Joseph Day from the Rams. They've got, Bryce Callahan, corner from Denver in free agency. Craig, what do you think about this team overall? I mean, their defense is for the most part veterans. They're not relying on any super young guys, minus Asante Samuel Jr. and Kenneth Murray. What makes you think this team gives top 5 potential?
So their starters on secondary are fantastic. They added J.C. Jackson to go with Derwin James. It's one of the top safeties in the league, and Siri Adderley is improving and going to be a starter, and a sneaky fantasy guy we've talked about. Asante Samuel Jr. is going to have another year in the league, and of course comes from that NFL bloodline where he knows what's expected of him, how to be a pro. And then you mentioned the pass rush. Putting Bosa with Khalil Mack sounds amazing. 2 things came to mind. One, they have a lot of new pieces on this defense, which always gives me a little bit of pause. Austin Johnson, Sebastian Joseph Day, Khalil Mack, J.C. Jackson, Callahan. You're talking about your starters on the field there for defense. It's not half, but it's starting to get to close to half, and injuries can happen, so who knows. And it's not as big of a deal, I said, for team defenses, but their linebackers are just underwhelming, in terms of their sort of inside linebackers. Drew Tranquil's showed all right, and actually better than Kenneth Murray, their former first-round pick. So we'll have to see what happens there. But in terms of team defenses, that probably matters a little bit less in terms of what you're expecting out of those guys to give you points. And then they're sort of switching up. It sounds like, their base defense, all teams sort of use a hybrid defense basically these days. So it's not just everyone sticking in one. But seeing Bosa standing up more is going to be a big change. And you never really know how someone takes to that right away. And that, can affect the pass rush, which affects your secondary opportunities. So I'm not low on them by any means. We're sitting here, sort of splitting hairs. They're, I think, number 4 for me overall, but it definitely have the potential to be the top defense in the league with the talent that they have.
Austin.
Yeah, they added a lot of really, really good pieces. I mean, bringing in J.C. Jackson and giving him a bag. having Asante Samuel there, the young guy, Derwin James back there in the secondary. I mean, they've got the pieces on the back end for sure. And then I do think Khalil Mack makes a big difference for this defense alongside Joey Bosa, a defense that honestly is their weakest link is really in the middle of the defense. You know, Kenneth Murray and Drew Tranquil. I think Drew is probably going to be the one to own this year, as crazy as that sounds, with, Kenneth Murray being a first-round pick. I don't think that his skills translate. Like, yes, he's a transcendent athlete. He's not really a transcendent football player. So he doesn't make the people around him better. And he's just not, he's not working out in the NFL, in my opinion. We'll see what he does this year. He's going to have all the opportunity to finally right the ship, but I probably wouldn't put my money on it. Losing Kazir White last year is probably the biggest storyline for this defense in the middle. I'm not sure that they'll be able to replace his production. He was like a top 5 producer at linebacker last year, if I'm not mistaken. Really racked up the tackles. So they need somebody to step up. And I think it's going to have to be Drew. But, the opportunity will be there for Murray. It's just, I think that's the weakest part of their defense. But outside of that, they're pretty strong, and they even got depth. They brought in JT Woods this year at free safety from, I think he was at Baylor. So he's a good piece there. They've got Kyle Van Noy and Troy Reeder. So they've got a few pieces on the back of that defense, kind of a little bit deeper down, where they can dig into if they get some injuries and things, and maybe not be, just in complete trouble. So I think their depth is good to support the ranking. And I think, just the top end talent that they have in the secondary, if those guys are able to create big plays and do what they do, I think this defense will be just fine.
Well, and when you look at how the team did in 2021 as a defense, they didn't rate very well. They didn't rank very well. They didn't play very well. I mean, there's a lot. They had to turn over a lot because the offense is playoff ready. I mean, this offense is ready to roll, but yet the defense was a problem. I mean, it was just, it was kind of a sieve last year. So fantasy purposes, I think the additions, as long as everybody gels it, and a lot of these additions are solid vets that should bring a level of maturity and understanding to it, as long as they pick up the playbook quickly, which I would assume shouldn't be that difficult, just because so many teams sit in nickel and dime packages anymore. You got to think that these guys are probably pretty versed in what is going to be expected of them. It's most of the time just terminology. From what I've understood, listening to people much smarter than myself, terminology tends to be the thing that holds people up, just because some teams just use some crazy verbiage to get their plays called. So I'll be interested to see, because this is one of those teams that I would love to see take the next step, and some of these guys they brought over should get them there. And if these guys really do help them get to the next level, it would not surprise me if this was a top 3 defense. I mean, honestly, if things go the way we'd anticipate. All right, next up, number 6 would be the Cincinnati Bengals, which now we're getting to. Actually, the Chargers were also getting defenses that not all of us had ranked as a top 10 defense, but Cincinnati is a defense that you guys both had 6 and 5. I didn't have ranked because I've got concerns. They could be turning into one of those youngest defenses in the league kind of thing. If Jesse Bates and some of these guys, they start to really rely on young guys, and I don't know how well that's going to bode for them. I'll start with you on this one, Austin. What do you think about Cincy? Seeing as you have them rated highest, what do you love about this defense, and what makes you think they're going to be a strong fantasy producer this year?
Well, Logan Wilson is one of the most underrated young linebackers in the league, I think. I've talked about this before, and I saw Craig smirk when I said it, but we were one play away for him for making a difference in a Super Bowl and potentially winning a Super Bowl, for the Bengals. One bad phantom pass interference call away, I thought, against Cup. I thought he did well for who he was going against and who Logan Wilson was at that time. I thought that was a big moment for Logan Wilson. And I'm going to stand by that. So I'm planting my flag there. Jermaine Pratt, I thought, did really well to step up this year. He was a guy going into the year that we weren't really sure, which way he would go. But I thought he did well this year, started working out. They've got some guys that they brought in on the defensive line. Obviously Sam Hubbard returning, and Trey Hendrickson returning. Those guys are 2 excellent defensive linemen to have. And then you look on the back end, Jesse Bates, we kind of opened the show talking about his contract situation, whether he would be back. We think he will, although I think that, if he's out, they do have Dax Hill there, who's listed at nickelback, but I could see maybe sliding into that free safety spot potentially. Just because of the talent there, what he did at Michigan, and just giving that young guy a shot. So, but you'd obviously love to see Bates back on that defense. He's really kind of the leader of that defense, the veteran leader. Von Bell is an excellent strong safety that plays alongside him. I've got him in a lot of leagues, so they've got some pieces. In their secondary, in their linebacking corps, and on the defensive line. Like, they've got all the guys in the right places. Is this a defense that could, finish further down the list? Yeah, probably. I would agree that there could be some concerns here. But, we've talked about it throughout the show. The offense is good enough to, do what they do. They're going to score quickly. Defense is going to be right back on the field. And overall, I think this is a pretty solid defense. So that's why I had them ranked so high. There's a few players on this defense who I think, I really love, who can create big plays this year and really generate some points.
Craig.
So with really only two guys, big name guys that are going out there getting the plays, they were tied for 11th, I think, in sacks last year. And they're going to have Joseph Osai coming back, who had injured. He was a rookie last year. Can get to the pass, can get to the passer, get to the quarterback. They added some other pass rushing pieces in the draft. And you talked about their linebackers. They got a nice set of linebackers. And, yeah, they have sort of a not as intimidating as you'd like secondary. But at the top of the show, I think Bates is going to end up being there this year anyway. And then Austin mentioned Hill is a nice sort of third safety, sort of utility piece back that they can use wherever they want. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that run that they went on last year and getting that experience as a defense, as a team. There wasn't a ton of turnover, so that's the same guys playing each other. They have a better idea what to expect and how to get those plays when that, again, most of these you're seeing high-powered offenses are expected to be high-powered offenses where teams are going to have to be playing catch-up or keeping up with that offense. So I think the opportunity is going to be there, and I think they showed a lot last year in the season where teams weren't expecting a whole lot out of them.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. I think I'm with you guys because when you look at last year, they were like 13th. I think they were right just outside the top 10, and that was, with guys that were still growing and still developing. And now that guys have really been put through the fire and getting through that long, deep playoff run, I think that really helps mold some of these young pieces, the Logan Wilsons of the world. And I'm with you guys. I think they've added some strong pieces. I think the kid that came over from Dallas, Awuzie, I think he will continue to take another step. And I like their safeties. Their top two, I think, are really good. And they have some guys that can slide in there just in case of emergency. So I'm with you guys. I think this defense is one, the Bengals could, continue to grow and develop in that offense. I mean, teams are going to have to be thrown to keep up because it's a high-powered offense. And I think that you begin to see that the high-powered offenses tend to have defenses that mirror them in potential fantasy value because teams are trying to keep up with them. So you're getting the interception, sacks, things like that. All right, so next up is a fantasy defense that somehow, no matter how bad the offense is, continues to be good, and that's the Pittsburgh Steelers. It seems like no matter what happens, this defense is fantasy relevant as a whole unit. I'll start with you, Austin. What do you like about Pittsburgh this year? What gives you hope that they could continue to stay a top 10 fantasy defense, even though we are seeing huge transition at the quarterback and they may have to lean on this defense to help them out?
Yeah. Well, TJ Watt's the heartbeat of the defense. Obviously, he's the guy that, as long as he's producing the sack numbers that he did last year in record-setting fashion, which I don't know that he can do again, maybe, but he should get his numbers. He's going to be the guy that's carrying this defense, producing those big plays and keeping your team defense relevant. Cameron Hayward, he's a guy who's been around for a long time, defensive lineman, can get to the quarterback, can get those tackles for losses, and he's just a really great player. A football player who just makes everyone around him better. They did bring in Miles Jack this year, to complement Devin Bush. I think it's a slight upgrade from what they had last year. And then you look at, guys like Minka Fitzpatrick, who's a top 5 safety in the league. Their secondary, in my opinion, could probably use some work, could use some help. But, Fitzpatrick and Terrell Edmonds, those are 2 nice pieces to have on the back end to try to keep the top on the defense as much as possible. And then just, really the good thing, the benefit that these cornerbacks are going to have is just, the pressure that those guys up front are able to generate. Is going to really create some relief for those guys on the back end, where they're not being asked to cover as long, not being asked to do the things that you would like your starting cornerbacks, your secondary to do, your top performers. So they're not going to have as much responsibility, but they're going to have to hold up, obviously, not give up big plays, things like that. We just talked about the Bengals, and I guess Pittsburgh's kind of in the same division where,
they definitely
I
are.
I wonder where, how much that influences how these defenses finish. Being in that division, obviously new quarterbacks on a lot of those teams. You do have Lamar to deal with, but a lot of running teams in this division. So it's going to be interesting. They're all high volume rushing offenses. Even the Pittsburgh Steelers, with Najee Harris, they're just going to feed him the ball. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how these defenses hold up and how they fare if they're able to create, big plays. Where those big plays come from, it's probably going to be sacks more than the interceptions and things like that. So, but overall, I think they're good.
All right, Craig, what are you thinking?
I like Hayward and I like Watt. Highsmith is fine, to put out there for another guy. We've seen before, you can sort of put up Brad out there next to TJ Watt on the other side, and Brad will probably get you a couple sacks in the NFL here if he wanted to go play for him. The linebackers,
do it
for a fantasy perspective, are a mess. If we're talking about team defense type of stuff here, Miles Jack has been in the league for 6 years. He has 6.5 sacks, 3 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles, and 4 fumble recoveries. And last year, he didn't do anything. He got none of that last year. Of course, he's going to be on a different team here, but it's not like the guy next to him and Devin Bush is doing a whole lot. He has 4 sacks in 3 years. Yeah, one of them was abbreviated, but 2 forced fumbles. He had a great first year, but then, last 2 years he's had 1 fumble recovery. A lot of that's random, I know, but this is the sort of stats you're looking at. 2 interceptions. These guys don't make, at least historically, big plays. Minka Fitzpatrick can back there, and he sort of had to get you more tackles last year, but again, that doesn't do a whole lot for us for team defense. And they have enough pieces that have been moving around and changing. They've sort of over the past 7-8 years had those 2 stalwarts at their sort of defensive ends with Hayward and Tuitt. Well, Tuitt's gone now, and they're bringing in a couple probably new starters. There's just too much that I don't like and too many things that are new to make me feel comfortable that they're going to get me enough of those big plays that I'd want them in my top 10.
All right, so moving on. Next up at number 8, the San Francisco 49ers. Is a defense that looks to not start any rookies. They've got guys that came over from the Rams and Samson Ekubom. They've got Charvarius Ward coming over from KC in the secondary. Austin, what makes you excited about this 49ers defense, and what makes you think they can be top 10?
Yeah, they play hard. Last year, they were a defense that just played hard and gave everybody fits in the playoffs. A defense that really came through as a unit. I was surprised at how well they played together. We talked a little bit earlier in the offseason about a guy like Javon Kinlaw, who is going to need to show out. Who knows if he will. But they do have some other nice pieces along that defensive line, obviously with Nick Bosa and Eric Armstead. I mentioned Dre Greenlaw earlier in the show. I think he's a great outside linebacker, really good complement to Fred Warner. And then, you look at the secondary, and they did bring in Charvarius Ward. They still have Jimmy Ward and Emmanuel Mosley, obviously, and then Darquez Denard. So, they've got some decent pieces in the secondary, not quite as deep as some of these other teams are. I think where they get the most depth is, just having good linebackers, and then even that third linebacker that they have, Al-Shair, so they've got a pretty good defense. I think they play above their talent just with how cohesive they are as a unit. We saw that again last year in the playoffs. So gonna have to see more than that, more than what they gave us last year, to be really like in the top 5. So I don't see them getting into the top 5, but I think top 10, you could make an argument for them, if they had the same kind of season they did last year, for sure.
Craig.
Yeah, so it all starts up front, sort of with what Austin said there. And they have year in and year out a good pass rushing unit. If you're sort of looking at some of the advanced stats, they do pretty well in terms of getting pressure on the quarterback, that creates stuff on the back end. They've sort of completely remade their secondary if you look at it from last year to this year, which is going to be interesting, but they still find guys that are able to make plays back there. And they're in a division that, okay, you can say outside of Seattle, but Seattle says they're not doing a full rebuild. That Pete Carroll's not at an age, I think, where he can afford to just do a complete rebuild and hope it all pans out. So they're going to be trying. They still have big playmakers on that offense, outside of quarterback probably, but they're going to be trying. So they're going to have plenty of opportunities in the secondary, whether it's because of maybe not so good teams, having to throw the ball, or the really good ones that are going to be throwing the ball. You got the newly re-signed or extended contract, whatever it is, for Kyler Murray. You got Stafford and the Rams there. It's going to be a tough division, and the 49ers feel they're right up there. They showed last year with the team that they had. It'll be interesting to see how that offense changes with what people expect to be a Trey Lance-led offense. If it has the potential for scoring points that people expect, even better. There's always that potential it doesn't go as well, and then that does reflect on the defense. So we'll have to see how that plays out and what Lance is feeling like. So I did have them sort of my back end, my top 10 here, but they do interest me in large part because of the amount of pressure that they're able to put on.
All right, so when we move on to a team that has zero change on the defense, but a lot of change on the offense, a big name change on the offense, it's Dallas Cowboys, their number 9 team defense. This defense is basically intact. I mean, you're going to see probably a lot of the same players that rolled out last year start this year until Van Der Esch gets hurt, and then someone else will be in at linebacker. But otherwise, you're seeing a lot of the same pieces that you've seen in recent years. Craig, we'll start with you because this is your team. What makes you think they've got top 10 potential this year?
Yeah, so I had them at the back end last year, and a number of places they were for fantasy, the top scoring fantasy defense, which I don't think we've seen a team repeat that. There's some stat like in the past 10, 12 years, and it might have been even longer than that. Teams just don't repeat. And in large part, one of the things that helped them was Trayvon Diggs with those interceptions.
Mm-hmm.
Again, not a sticky stat you see from year to year. I don't expect him to repeat that, but they do have a lot of just nice, solid pieces across the board. Dan Quinn is still leading the defense, which the way they play that, they get a lot of turnovers and get a lot of pressure even without huge names. So, again, I expect them to be solid. I expect them to get pressure, and they got Micah Parsons. He's not to that TJ Watt level, but he's someone similar to that where he's a guy that can sort of do it all, and he's going to be on the field for him, and that's a great place to start.
Okay, so Austin, to make sure we get to our one honorable mention, we're going to drop you to number 10. Denver Broncos comes in as our number 10 team defense. This team is a team that, has brought over a couple pieces. So they got defensive end DJ Jones from the 49ers. They brought over Randy Gregory. That was kind of their big free agent signing from Dallas. Kareem Jackson from Houston's there, Ronald Darby from Washington, Quan Williams from San Francisco. So they got some new pieces. It's a very veteran defense, though. I mean, most of those pieces they brought over are veterans. So what makes you think the Denver Broncos are getting into the top 10 this year?
The Denver Broncos have the back end of the defense to support a team that could generate some good big plays, turnovers, things like that. At the addition of, they've got Kareem Jackson, obviously Pat Surtain, who's going to be, a great young talent there, already playing well at a high level. Justin Simmons, you got Ronald Darby and Kwan Williams. So you got some really nice pieces all across the secondary, and then you've got a couple of depth pieces you could throw in there as well. linebacker is the one big concern that I see on this defense. We're not Josie Jewell. He's coming off a year where he was injured most, if not all, of the season. Alex Singleton, who played well in Philadelphia as an undrafted linebacker, did really well. We'll see if he can fit in this defense. But outside of that, a lot of question marks there at the inside linebacker. Up front, and off the edge, you got some really nice pieces there. Bradley Chubb, they brought in Nick Bonito, but DJ Jones, Mike Purcell, and Dermont Jones, those are all really nice pieces to have. And then of course, they even have Owuzurike. So they've added some pieces up front. They have, and I guess I didn't mention Baron Browning, who we'll see what he does. He's still one of those guys that's kind of like, is he going to work or is he not? But a piece that I'm watching for some of my deeper leagues. But the addition of Randy Gregory is a big help there. So they've got some pieces up front. They definitely got the secondary pieces. The question is going to be, kind of similar to what we talked about with the Chargers, is like, what's the middle of that defense going to look like? How good is it going to be? Yeah, they're veterans, but can they stay on the field? And if they can they produce? Are they a good fit now for that defense and the direction that defense is going? Which, I think it looks different than what it did last year for sure.
Yeah, this was a defense that did not grade out well. I mean, they were, back half of the NFL when it came to almost any statistical category. So they need veterans. They needed help. They needed to get better in a lot of ways. And I think, like you said, a lot of those pieces do help that. So we do need to bring an honorable mention up because you now see our top 10. We got the Rams, Bills, Colts, Bucks, Chargers, Bengals, Steelers, 49ers, Cowboys, Broncos. But we didn't mention a team that has literally for the last 10 years been a top 10, if not top 15 defense. So they've never been outside the top 15 in the last 10 years, and that's the New England Patriots. This is a team that when I was looking through historical data, they were top 14 basically for the last 10 years. So they were at 14 one year, and they were at I think 13 one year, and otherwise they were top 10. And even last year, they were the second ranked fantasy team defense, depending on where you look at scoring. Obviously, I was just looking at Fantasy Pros because they have a really nice historical data section there for fantasy football purposes. Patriots are by and large a team that's sound in most areas. They're normally solid when it comes to tackling, when it comes to coverage. They grade out really well. What do you guys think about this team defense this year? A lot of veterans. They don't tend to start rookies or even second year guys for the most part unless they're really studs. So I'll start with you, Kraig. New England, do you think these guys could break the top 10 with what they're doing?
Bill Belichick's the head coach. Defense is his specialty, so certainly I think they have an opportunity. He's going to have them playing well, put people on the field that are going to be in the right spot and do what they're supposed to. It's just one of those things where it's hard to get excited about them because if you look at the names, like they don't really have those star players anymore. They have one of the McCourties, who's, like 33 or something like that. They're really getting up there in age and probably not a full-time player anymore. Judon is probably the closest thing to a star player on defense in terms of, what you're looking at for star players for big plays, getting you sacks, tackles for a loss, stuff like that. They got an underwhelming defensive line. You have, Barmore, who we like, but he's a young guy that's going to be going into his second year and isn't a household name. The linebackers we mentioned they got some nice things in the secondary, but the big thing that helped boost them up last year in the secondary was J.C. Jackson. He had like 23 pass deflections. He had those 9 interceptions, and the Patriots were second in interceptions. Now, you can't take all 9 of those away, of course. I'm not saying that. But in terms of interceptions and pass deflections, he had, by far the lion's share of any one player. And I'm just not seeing a whole lot of excitement in terms of guys that I think are going to go out there and make those big plays that I can count on right now. Is there a great chance that some of the parts is better than the individual pieces? Sure, because Bill Belichick's been doing it for years. I just have a hard time getting excited about it and doing it, even though I probably should.
Yeah, well, and and everybody, they've been so good for so long that nobody really wants to give them their just desserts at this point. But they continue to produce and continue to prove everybody wrong. So you almost have to bring them into the conversation. Austin, any final thoughts on the Patriots?
Yeah, it's hard to overlook the losses that they have with J.C. Jackson, Stephon Gilmore, and you look at that secondary, and I will say a guy that stands out to me, Marcus Jones. He took him in the 3rd round, who, I think he had some off-the-field issues, but otherwise he could be a guy who comes up really big and makes a presence in the secondary. complements Malcolm Butler. They do have Kyle Duggar. Devin McCourty's a true vet, so they've got some guys in the secondary. That's not really the area I'm most worried about. It's, it felt like they were very intentional bringing in Mac Wilson because they brought him in so early. They could have brought any other middle linebacker in who, personally would have been a better player. But they were very intentional about it. I think they think that he's going to complement Jawan Bentley well. But yeah, Matthew Judon, a big player. You'd like to see Josh Uche see the field a little bit more. I think he's got some promise. And then Christian Barmore, a young guy who's just going to have to prove, who he is and what he is. So, they've got some decent pieces, but yeah, there still are a lot of question marks on this defense. I think, they've taken some big losses. So they're not the defense that they have been. So it's probably fair to think they could be a team that just, this year falls out of the top 10.
All right, so there you have it, folks. Our top 10 is in the books. Our honorable mention is in the books. Hopefully this helps you guys get ready for your redrafts. I know redraft season is fast approaching. I know I'm seeing things start to go off and leagues getting set up. So make sure you jump over to rotoheat.com if you're looking for more information. If you're in IDP or any other type of fantasy football, we got you covered. We can also get you connected to our Discord and our Facebook channel or Facebook page where you can talk with thousands of other fantasy football fans and us because we like to chat over there. We thank you guys as always. Next week, Kraig and Austin will be here. I'll be on vacation, but they will be here bringing you some great IDP content. And as we get to the end of IDP for this offseason, our live streams, don't forget, stick with us at rotoheat.com and stick with us here on YouTube because we will be dropping IDP content during the season. And we're here. It's training camp. We're excited. Everybody's pumped. We're back to football sooner rather than later. We will see people on the field actually doing stuff, and we got Hall of Fame game coming up in a few weeks. The world is our oyster. We are merely just a few weeks away from real football, and that is exciting. So we thank you guys always for hanging out with us. We love y'all. We'll talk to you next week.